Hello everybody. I'm going to go a little bit out of order when I'm doing now for my secret prehistory number 6. So the last one I did was where the Sumerians were 500,000 years old, and you might think I might now go to something about 400,000 years ago. But I'm actually going to skip, and I'm going to be looking at the medieval period. So the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm trying to work out, similar as I did to the last video, whether it was possible for the medieval period to have been as long and as far back as the people living in the medieval period said. So if you ask people that were living in the medieval period, you say, well, how long did the medieval period last for? And they'll say, oh, I don't know, thousands of years, 10,000 years, 30,000 years, 50,000 years, 100,000 years. So you go anywhere up to 100,000 years. That's how long people would say. And if you ask them what's the minimum, they'd probably be saying 10, 15,000. That's the minimum that they would accept as being the medieval period. Right? At the period where people are fighting with swords and shields and arrows and all that, and doing all the medieval things, castles, all that sort of stuff, kings and queens, serfs, and that whole thing. So you're quite surprised when you look in a history book and you ask them how long was the medieval period, and they say 500 years. You're like, well, okay, that's not part of it, but what's the whole of it? And they say, no, 500 years, start to finish. And they split it up into little 100-year periods, and they can work it all out. And they say to you, it's not 100,000 years, it's not even 10,000 years. So that range of people that you'd ask in the medieval period, they'd say it's anywhere from 10,000 to 100,000 years. They're wrong. So okay, that's very wrong. That's an order of magnitude of, what's from 500 up to at least 10,000. Like that's at least 20 times up to 200 times wrong. That's very wrong. And we talk about the Sumerians saying, oh, well, we were 500,000 years ago, and in reality it was 10,000, or at least according to historians it's 10,000. That's an order of magnitude of 50. And that's pretty big too, obviously. So why we all get this all wrong? It's so vastly wrong. And you ask them, so historians, why were they saying themselves that it was so different, and they can document all this time? And they can say, oh, this happened this many thousands of years ago. Why is that all wrong when they've documented it, just like the Sumerians documented it for their 500,000 year period? And the answer is, oh, they wanted to make themselves look good. Okay, so we change history to make ourselves look better than we are. Okay, that makes sense. We know that the Romans did this. The Romans, of course, adopted Greek culture, so much so that even today you ask an Italian and you say to them, hey, the Greeks did it first, and the Greeks will say, yeah, and the Italians will say, no, we did it first. They're so insistent that the Greeks copy the Italian culture or the Roman culture, but it was actually the other way around. So let's have a quick look. So the medieval period was 800 to 1300 AD, roundabout. Right? That's the 500-year period. Before that, we didn't have the technology to be able to build armour and weapons of that quality, and after that we'd moved on to other things, more civilised. Right, so I wanted to now look just briefly at, and I'm going to assume it's 100,000 years. So I know that that's not the way we're supposed to do it. We're supposed to go, oh, you've got to prove it, but I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to make the assumption now and try to disprove that assumption. So 800 AD, what was the quality of the equipment they were using? Well, so we had this sophisticated method. We had knights and page boys and all sorts of stuff like that. And would they be able to take on a modern army? Not very well, but they would survive for a while. And I mean, if there was enough of them, they'd be able to take it out. Yeah. They were pretty good fighters. They were very disciplined. And let's say that they were taking on ISIS, they'd probably do a pretty good job. If they're taking on the United States Army, they'd probably have to have a lot of people. So it really depends on who they're fighting against. But no, they can do a decent job now. Now let's look at what was around before that. So we know that throughout the medieval period they advanced in different ways. Let's have a look at what was going on before that. Let's say 0 AD, what was going on then? So at that point in time, so you're talking about 0 AD, Jesus Christ time, the Roman Empire, they were dressing in robes, so clearly that's not medieval, right? You know, we sort of know what people were wearing in the time of Jesus Christ, which is quite well documented, and the Romans and all that. And then of course that's that part of the world. Well, obviously not a medieval period. Well, firstly, that's a different part of the world, and we don't really have documentation as to what was going on in the period, parts of the world that were taking part in the medieval period, because not everyone was dressing in armour and all that. That was really just like England, Germany, France, maybe Spain. It wasn't the whole world. It wasn't really Rome. But what was Rome doing in 0 AD? Well, they had legionnaires, and what were the Roman legions? What did they look like at that time? Well, they were wearing massive armour, having big swords, spears, all sorts of varied equipment, longbows, cavalry, and then you go, hang on, is that different from the medieval? No, it's not as advanced. Okay, but could we call that medieval? And so probably you could. You know, it's not that different as far as weaponry and, okay, so the discipline was different, but that's just a different leader. Yeah, okay, so that could be medieval. Alright, so medieval could be 1500 years, maybe even 2000. Okay, so we're now saying, okay, depending on your definition of medieval, it's not so dissimilar there. They go, okay, well, but what about before that? Well, then you go, well, the Egyptians, when they went into battle, they were wearing quite sophisticated things. They weren't wearing armour so much because it was quite hot, and armour's quite hot, but a lot of the sophistication was still there. Then you go back, and you really can go back right to the start of the civilization period. You know, even the start of that, say you're talking 10,000 years. So, okay, so you're certainly not into living in caves at that point in time. You're at least in the civilized areas, and again, we defined this in the last video. That's kind of like the iPhone areas. So if you just assume that they had this level of technology, therefore they're civilized, and people that decided not to use that and decided to go in a different direction were not, but weren't necessarily any weaker. Well, so we've got 10,000 years for the medieval period, and then we go, okay, but that's it, right? Because anywhere before the civilized period couldn't possibly have had anything like the medieval. Look, well then you go, well, but then we have the cataclysms, and we have all of this stuff that says, well, actually we would have reset, and then would have taken a while to rebuild, and if you go back before the cataclysm, we probably would have been pretty advanced. And you go, and then we know that Atlantis was 128,000 years old, according to fossil records and archaeology of the Richat structure site. Oh, well, they were kind of a part of the whole medieval thing. And you go, oh, okay, 100,000 years doesn't seem so ridiculous. And you go, oh, so then, well, where's all the evidence? Well, there's a simple answer for where's all the evidence. When you have a cataclysm, it destroys everything. It would go around and just completely obliterate everything. So the only things that wouldn't obliterate were things that were already fossilised, which again is just people that were mostly human sacrifices, living in caves and in particular conditions. So knights fighting on the battlefield, dressed in full body armour, probably wouldn't fossilise. Did we have the ability to make metal? Of course we did. We had fire. What was it as sophisticated? I guess my assumption, my theory, is that just before the cataclysm we were more advanced than we were, well, certainly than we were straight after, because we would have lost so much stuff, and then there probably would have been a period where we went around destroying technology, because we blame technology for the cataclysm. We might not, but I think enough people would that it would be destroyed. So then you'd have a period of rebuilding. So you kind of would have, after each cataclysm, you'd normally have a period of 3,000 to 5,000 years where you went backwards. And then even then, after that, you wouldn't be back to what you were. So I would expect that since the last cataclysm was 11,400 years ago, I expect that up until 6,000 to 8,000 years, we would be back to absolute point zero, hunting and gathering. But that's not to say that 12,000 years we were hunting and gathering, because we could well have been much more advanced. So if there was a record, and people are saying, oh, look, 8,000 to 10,000 years we were hunting and gathering, but 12,000 years we were in the medieval period again, I'd say, well, I can't prove that we definitely were in terms of fossils and all that, but I'd say that there's a decent chance. I mean, we can't prove the medieval period at all, even 800 years ago, as far as fossils are concerned. Okay, there are a couple of people buried in the tombs, but they wouldn't have survived 10,000 years. And you know, even the ones which were knights buried in full armour in, you know, underground things, it wouldn't survive. If they'd done that 12,000, 20,000 years ago, it wouldn't survive today. We've got to realise this. The absence of evidence doesn't mean it didn't happen. It also doesn't mean it did happen. But, so is it plausible that it was 100,000 years? I don't want to say it could have been 150. The medieval period could have been 150,000 years. It might not have been straight. There might have been periods where, oh, there's a cataclysm and we're not having medieval, and then we go back to medieval. But, you know, that could well have been that sort of length of time. Now, what's the maximum length I would give for the medieval time? Look, I think that I haven't actually gone over the Atlantis bit, but if we assume Atlantis started 128,000 years ago, and there was probably some things before that, we generally consider Atlantis to be part of the medieval period. I'd say that it'd probably be a bit before that, but not that much before. So I'd probably put it at about 150,000. I'd say that is the maximum length, probable maximum length roughly. And I mean, I say that, and it could be 160, 170,000. And a lot of people might say, well, that's just so silly, we weren't even humans then. Well, actually we were. Not only were we Homo sapiens, well, we were humans 2.5 million years ago. We were Homo sapiens. We were Homo sapiens sapiens. In other words, we looked exactly like we do today. So the person might have been a bit shorter. And that was 180,000 years ago. So this is the exact same type of human that we've got now. And yeah, there were some other types of humans going around. There were still Neanderthals, still Denisovans, pretty big numbers that we probably would have fought against. And we might have called them something else. What might we have called them? I don't know. Maybe we would have called them goblins and stuff like that. Which they were mythological beings that we supposedly fought against quite a lot. Well, that would have been the Neanderthals. Would have been called orcs and goblins and the like. What about the Denisovans? Probably would have been called giants because they were quite tall. Giants or ogres or trolls or something like that. Oh, okay. So you mean those mythological creatures were actually just different types of humans, quite possibly. But yeah, and we know that they were a part of the mythological period, all those things. They could have been real. But just today we're describing them in a different way. This was a Denisovan human. Because there's no mythological record of a Denisovan or a Neanderthal, but there are records of other things which could have been there, such as, you know, orcs, goblins, that would be Neanderthals perhaps, and perhaps giants, trolls, and you know, things like that. Ogres might have been Denisovans. So anyway, that's something to think about. But yeah, look, I think it's certainly very plausible. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but it's very plausible that the medieval period was 100,000 years. I say it could have even been 150. It might have even been more than that, but that's as far as I want to go, up to 150. And yeah, I don't think it was just 500 years. I think that's really unlikely. In fact, I say it's not true. It's not 100. It's not just 500 years. It's not that short. Anyway, that's it from me. Bye bye now.